Hazard Communication and Community Preparedness in Barangay Tagumpay. How the report was made, prepared by Jesus Aculiador Jr. Welcome to Hazard Communication and Community Preparedness in Barangay Tagumpay, How the Report was Made. This presentation walks you through the complete process behind the research, from conceptualization, tool development, and data gathering, all the way to analysis and final outputs. This study began with a clear need. The Philippines remains one of the most disaster-exposed countries in the world, and lakeshore communities like Barangay Tagumpay face unique and heightened risks. I conducted this research to understand how hazard communication works at the barangay level, what systems are effective, what gaps exist, and what residents and officials experience during actual hazards. The workflow followed a structured research path. I identified the problem, reviewed literature, and developed a conceptual framework. I designed and pilot tested our mixed method tools before collecting surveys, focus group discussions, and an expert interview. Afterward, I analyzed both quantitative and qualitative data, synthesized the results, and finalized the full manuscript and appendices. The report focused on 4 core questions. How effective is hazard communication? What strengths and gaps exist in preparedness systems? How do the findings align with participatory development communication and community-based disaster risk reduction? And finally, what evidence-based improvements are necessary? The general objective was to assess hazard communication and community preparedness in Barangay Tagumpay. Specifically, I measured perceptions of preparedness, identified operational strengths and gaps, examined PDC and CBDRR in practice, and developed practical, evidence-based recommendations. To build the study's foundations, I reviewed Republic Act 10121, UNDRR Early Warning Frameworks, and major works on participatory development communication, and CBDRR. I also examined Philippine DRRM studies from IFRC, DILG, LLDA, and PAG-ASA, as well as the Sphere Handbook for Evacuation Center Standards. This allowed me to identify gaps in existing research and refine our focus. The study blended 2 key frameworks. Participatory development communication emphasizes two-way communication, co-creation of knowledge, empowerment, and community inclusivity. Community-based disaster risk reduction highlights local capacity, governance, and context-specific preparedness. This guided my tool creation, analysis, and interpretation. The conceptual framework covered 5 DRRM components: preparedness and awareness, early warning systems, evacuation protocols, evacuation centers and logistics, and disaster response coordination. It examines how inputs like communication systems and logistical capacity interact with community processes and ultimately produce measurable perceptions, gaps, and recommendations. Methodological approach, I used mixed methods, participatory design, merging quantitative surveys with qualitative focus group discussions, and an expert interview. This ensured triangulation and allowed community voices to shape the interpretation of results. The study took place in Barangay Tagumpay by Laguna, a lakeshore community that is flood-prone and historically affected by monsoon rains and lake rising. Its vulnerability made it an ideal setting for assessing hazard communication systems. Participants include 11 residents who experienced flooding directly, 9 barangay officials responsible for DRRM operations, and 1 expert environmental journalist who provided external context and analysis. I use purposive sampling because we needed participants with direct DRRM roles and lived experience, or rather lived experiences. While this limits statistical generalization, it provides deeper and more contextual insights appropriate for pilot studies. I used multiple tools, resident and barangay surveys, focus group discussions, an expert interview, and document and map references, including Pag-asa advisories and NOAA datasets. This combination captured both perception-based and operational data. All tools were pilot tested with selected participants. This allowed me to refine unclear questions and ensure alignment with both PDC and CBDRR principles before formal fieldwork began. Surveys were conducted face-to-face in the community. The focus group discussion was held at the barangay hall, with the expert interview was conducted online. Data were consolidated through weighted means and thematic coding. I computed weighted means based on a 5-point Likert scale, namely strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. This made it possible to compare residents' and officials' perceptions across the 5 DRRM components. For qualitative data, I used thematic coding. Themes emerged from the repeated ideas in the focus group discussions, operational strengths and weaknesses, PDC and CBDRR categories, and insights from the expert interview. Triangulation allowed me to cross-check survey findings with the FGD discussions and expert viewpoints. This produced clear convergence and divergence patterns, strengthening the credibility of the results. All participants gave informed consent. Participation was voluntary, confidential, and respectful. Data were used strictly for academic purposes. The results came from combined statistical computations, direct quotations from discussions, observation notes, and expert commentary mapped against PDC and CBDRR. The study found high effectiveness in early warning systems and strong preparedness levels among both residents and officials. However, evacuation centers and logistics scored a low, and post-disaster assessments remained weak. Residents tended to view systems more positively, while officials were more critical, an insight validated by triangulation. Recommendations were based on empirical data, PDC principles, CBDRR standards, and sphere guidelines. These include institutionalizing the LGU brief, improving evacuation centers, strengthening map literacy, forming a community DRRM communication team, and establishing a transportation mobilization plan. I acknowledge key limitations such as purposive sampling, self-reported data, lack of some DRRM documents, and the study's cross-sectional nature. These limitations framed the boundaries of the report's generalizability and conducted cautious interpretation. The final outputs include a complete 150-page manuscript, full DRRM analysis, hazard communication assessments, an LGU brief template, and complete appendices containing survey tools, photographs, and diagrams. Thank you for listening.